we've discussed about APIs at length. We've created APIs, we've gone through the whole concept of public versus private APIs. We've worked with system users. We have a glimpse or an understanding of what subscription services are. Um, we've used API keys. We've looked at documentation. But in this video, what we're going to do is that we're going to build a CRUD application using APIs from start to end. So we're going to actually be hands-on and just work from beginning to end, building out a solution. All right. So our solution is a very simple one. We're going to be working on an insurance API. So this API is going to have three endpoints. The first endpoint is basically a data entry endpoint. So we're going to be able to add plans to this database of insurance plans. The second API is just going to enable us to query, just a plain query of this table. And our third API is going to be much more demanding with regards to the function. We're going to have to build a system to get a quote. So now, a little thing you need to know about this API system is there are there are three insurance types in this our insurance API: home, auto, and boat. And this plans or this types of insurance varies by state, so the prices will vary by state. In this application, we're just going to assume that everything is in US dollars and all the states are in the US. All right, so we're just trying to keep it as simple as possible. Now, to get a quote, we have a couple of rules that we want to follow. If a user or if the applicant is less than 18 years old, we want to apply 15% markup. If this person is greater than 30 years old or older than 30 years old, we want to apply 10% discount. And if someone purchases all three policies, then we want to apply $100 credit to their quote. So it will be, a discount of $100. So let's get started. All right, so I'm going to jump into my in-house cloud console. I'm already logged in. To get to the API hub, I just have to click on the API hub tab and it loads up. Now to get into it, to create a new API, all I have to do is click on the create API button. It's going to open this nice form. Now you can go ahead and do a lot of things, but I would say instead of filling out your whole API, you might just want to fill up the first page first and save. So I'm just going to call this API insurance. It's going to be our insurance API. You get to call yours whatever you want. I'm going to give it a sub URL path of insurance. This is just our domain, just our domain name for this API. So we're not going to get into the nitty gritties of private, public API keys. I want to keep this a little simple. So I'm going to expose this API to the public. So at this point, I have everything I need to be able to save my API. All right. So there you have it. I have my insurance API. I can begin to build up my endpoints. So there are three endpoints that I would like to build. The first will be the one to add a plan. The second one will be to query plans. And the third one will be to get a quote. All right, so to create an endpoint, I'm in the endpoints tab. I'll click on the add button. So our first is going to be a post request. And this is going to have a slug of create plan. That's what we want to do. All right. So when I get into the details page, I see that I already have the three environments set up. With everything on the in-house cloud platform, there are three environments: development, test, and production. All right, so I'm just going to give this a quick description. It's endpoint creates. That's it. All right. So I need a function to execute. Give me 1 second. And I currently do not have that function. So what we're going to do is that we're going to go write a function. So I'm going to save this. And I'm going to jump it over and jump into the function builder. I'm going to create a function that I'm going to call this function create insurance plan. Function creates an insurance plan. It's that simple. It's going to have one workflow. I'm going to call this workflow data entry or insert data. Right. So for the first step of my workflow, I am going to sanitize my data. All right. So because this is going to be used in an API, and obviously this is going to be used in a post request. So if we looked at our system generated parameters, we will see that we have a request body parameter. This parameter will be filled and will be available for us to use in this function. All right. So I am going to set a variable, call it sanitized body. And I'm only doing this just to show that this option is available. We usually use sanitization to clean up uh, malicious data or malicious scripts in our APIs. I just wanted to highlight that this was, available. Obviously, for this demo, it's not required because I'm not going to send myself malicious code. But just a heads up that you can do things like this. Request body, and I'm just going to use a method called sanitize. That's that. So I have my sanitized data in my first step. The next step is going to be to insert this data. So I'm going to use a MongoDB operation. I'm going to use one of my 3 MongoDB databases. I'm going to use the test Mongo. I'm going to call this response DB response. The name of my table is insurance plans. And we are going to be updating 1. Okay. All right. So our query. So we are going to be setting this based on policy type. Size body, policy type. And our second base is going to be the state. All right. Then we are going to set in the rest of the data. Our currency, we're just going to have the currency default to dollars, USD. We're going to give the policy a name. A field is called policy name. And it's going to come from our sanitized body. Okay. And finally, our base rate. So we've sanitized our data. We are currently inserting our data into our test MongoDB test Mongo database into our insurance plans table, and we indeed want to upsert. So this means that if this data does not exist, we want to create this data. All right. So we're going to add another step, and this is going to be an if-else statement. Just going to type right, if-else statement. So we're going to say that if the DB response, we're going to map into a field called modified count. And we're going to say if this is falsy. So this is another way of saying that it does not exist. We're going to add another step. We're going to say and, not add, and, right? We're going to say if the DB response upserted count, if this is falsy. So basically what this means is that if there is no modified count and there is no upserted count, so it means that no documents were updated or no documents were created, right? So basically this query failed. That's basically what that means, that this operation here failed, right? So if this is the case, we just need to return, we're just going to return, I think we're going to return the object. We're just going to say success. We're going to say false. But if this is not the case, we're going to return a message that says success, true. That's it. So we just go about our function. We clean up our data just to make sure that there's no malicious content, no scripts, no nothing like that. We go to the next step, our MongoDB operation. We selected our database. We're inserting uh, data into our insurance plans table. We are basically upserting if necessary, if there's the data does not exist, and this is based on the state and the policy type. We only have about 5 to 6, I think, 5 to 6 fields in our um, in our in the record in a document. Doing an if else statement, we're saying, hey, if this transaction was not successful, then return success false, not true. But if it was indeed successful, then success true. All right. It's always good to take a second look at your work. All right. So let's go to the config. We're going to deploy this function. All right. So we're going to go back to our API, create plan. We're going to select this function. We're going to save. We're going to go to the configuration and we are going to deploy to our development environment. So deploy. All right. So we're going to test this out and we're going to actually go ahead and create a few of these plans. All right, so I'm going to copy the link to our dev environment. I am going to pull up Postman, open it up in a different one. The post request. RD is going to be JSON. All right, so we have a few fields. One of the fields was policy type. And I'm going to say this is home. And let's see, state. We're going to say Texas. Base rate. I'm going to say, just say 300. These numbers make no sense in the grand scheme, but it's just demo data. All right, so we're going to call policy name. I'm going to call this America's Best Home. Okay, I think that's all we need. And I'm going to ping that API. All right, so that was successful. We inserted our data. So we're just going to populate more data. I'm just going to say, since it's home, auto, and boat, so we're just going to do boat. We're going to say this is America's Best Boat. I'm going to change the price here to, let's see, 250. And we're going to ping that. All right. Then we're going to leave this as boat. We're going to change the state to Florida. And we are going to say this is 150. I'm just putting random data at this point. I'm going to change this to home. Change that to home. Change to 350. Change that to auto. Change that to auto. Change that to 100. So now we have two sets of rates. We have rates for Texas and we have rates for Florida. And this is kind of coming in handy when we're trying to get a quote, because the quote is going to be based on where the user is located, the state is going to be based on the user's age, and it's going to be based on a couple criteria of a couple of our internal rules that we've set. All right, awesome. So now we have one of our APIs done. We've been able to create the API to create insurance plans. And if I were to pull in my database, you can see the plans that we just created. They're being properly inserted into my insurance plans table. Pull this out. All right, so the next API that we want to do is just want to query the insurance plans. It's a simple API. Now, this API could be as simple to as complex as you want. That's up to you. You could, this is just at this point database querying. It could be as simple or as complex as you want. So we're gonna do ours very simple, just because we want to move on to the next one, which is the quote. But let's see, get plans. That's what we're gonna call it. It's gonna be a get request. That's it. So we have this endpoint. We have all our three domains for the three environments. We do not have a function to execute. So I'm just gonna save this and go write the function. So I'm gonna go over here. I'm gonna say get insurance plans. Get insurance plans. Okay. Get the workflow. So we're gonna call this workflow get data. We're only gonna have one workflow. The first step, you could sanitize your data. You could do whatever you want, but we're not gonna do any of that. So our data is gonna look like a filter. It's gonna have a limit. It's gonna have a skip. So what I'm gonna do is I am going to do a MongoDB operation. Okay. It's my test Mongo database. I'm going to call this DB response. Table is called insurance plans. It's going to be a simple find query. And for this, I am just going to use the request body filter. We're just going to be taking the filter that we get from wherever the request is coming from. And that's going to be our query. All right. And for skip, we're going to say, we're going to use the request body skip. That's that. And for the limits, I'm going to use the request body. I got to go to text, request body. All right, so that's all I'm going to do here. I'm going to add a second step to return the response. Here we're going to say DB response. And that's it. I'm going to save this. I'm going to deploy. And I'm going to go back to my API, go back to the get plans endpoint, look for the function to execute a section and just click on it and select my get insurance plans function. I'm going to save, I'm going to go to the configuration, I'm going to deploy to my development environment, and that's it. For it to copy out this endpoint URL for our development environment and go back to Postman. This is going to be a all right, so let's go back here. Oh man. So this is a mistake. This is because we're accepting request body. This has to be a post request. Right. Okay. So this is gonna have to be a post request. I'm gonna redeploy to the development environment. And we are on track. Okay, so go back to Postman. This is gonna be a post request. Get plans, the body is going to be JSON. Remember, it had 3 fields. Limit, say it's 0. Skip, let's say 0. And filter, we're just going to say this is going to be an empty object. All right, ping it. We should get all our data. And that's what we get. So let's say we wanted to query, let's say, policies, home policies. We say policy type, home. Okay. If I ping that, so I filter down to my home policies. So I have the home policy for Texas and I have the home policy for Florida. And in this case, Florida seems to be more expensive than Texas. All right. So basically, this is, you can make this as simple as you want or as dynamic as you want. I just wanted to demo out, how you could build some of these things. All right. So that's our second API. We were able to create plans. We're able to um, uh, get these plans, query them back. So now let's build an API endpoint to get a quote. So now we want to get a quote, based on some user data. All right, so I'm going to go back to the in-house cloud console. I'm going to create another endpoint. We're going to call this endpoint quote. And this is going to be a post. I was really hoping that I will get have a get request here and there, but it's all post requests today, so bear with me. All right, so get quote, and I do not have a function as usual. So I'm going to jump into the function builder. We're going to build our function. This is going to be a much involved function because our function is going to be doing a couple of things. It's going to be checking the user's age, and based on the age, it's going to apply certain constraints to the pricing that they get. And if they were to get all three policies, we're going to be adding $100 credit. All right, so let's jump in. Okay, jump into the function builder. Then call this function get insurance quote. Let's say it gets, or I will say calculates insurance quote. Okay, we go to the workflow. We're gonna call this workflow calculate. We're gonna add a step. So now this is gonna look. Before we jump in and get too far out, I kind of want to paint a picture of how this uh, request is what it's gonna look like. So I'm just gonna pull Postman back up. So it's gonna look something like this. There's gonna be a date of birth. Let's just call it DOB, and this date of birth is gonna be. Um, I guess we could use American date formats. So we can say month or day, month or month, day, year. All right, so we can say uh, 11, 10, 1980. So that'll be a date of birth. And it'll be state. And we'll say, maybe state, let's say Texas. And the final field will be policy types. This is going to be an array. So it could be one or more policies. So it could be home, auto, or both. So based on these three queries, we'll be able to give the user a quote. We have some logic centered around the user's age. We have some logic. Well, we don't have some logic. We basically get the insurance plans for the state. And based on the type of policy, we have all these rules depending on how many policies you do have. All right, so let's jump into it. We can pull this out. All right, so this is we're just gonna jump straight into a MongoDB operation. Actually, no, just because of this is a much, uh, let's secure this a little bit and let's sanitize our data. So I'm just gonna say I want to sanitize this data. And that's our request body. Remember that this request body is a system generated parameter. So because of this function is used in an API, the system automatically generates a lot of parameters. And you can create your own parameters, but with regards to API functions, you cannot use a parameter that you created just because this API, uh, it's all based on whatever is in the original request. All right, so the request body, and I'm going to apply a sanitize method. That's it. Our data is cleaned up. And we're going to run a MongoDB operation to get our plans. We're going to be selecting our test MongoDB database. And perhaps, you haven't seen the video about databases. If we were to go over here and just jump out, we do have this database tab where you get to insert all the databases that you want to use within your applications, your APIs, your automations. You get to connect your database resources. You get to use them in the function builder and connect those functions to your web apps, your APIs, your automations, and so on. It's very simple, very convenient way of working. Okay, so let's go back to a function. I'm going to call this DB response. The name of our table was insurance plan. All right, so our collection is called insurance plans. Okay. All right, so we want to query based on the expected query that we're getting from the user. And if we just pull Postman back up, we're querying policy types and state. So the expected query is going to have the policy types as an array. Expand this. And the state as a text. So we're going to do that. All right, so we're going to query the policy type. And this is going to be a MongoDB in query. And it's going to be in the sanitized data policy types field. Right? And we're going to query the state. That's going to be our sanitized data state field. All right, so that's that. We find these no limits. Okay, so the next step is going to be if an if else statement. Just going to type if. All right. So we're going to say if we have no DB response. So let's say the DB response length is 0. DB response length. So we expect an array is equals to 0 add a step, and we return a message that says, let's see, message no coverage available. So maybe the query is from a state that we don't support, or for a plan that we don't support. So in this instance, no coverage available. It's pretty straightforward. But now we get to dive into the logic that we stated in our document. So basically, let's get back to the logic. So we say, hey, if the user's age is less than 18, 15% markup. If the user is older than 30, 10% discount. And if the user purchases all three policies, then they get 100. If the user, well, do we want to do all three policies, or do we just want to say if the user, we have to get three policies? All right. So let's just say if the user were to get three policies, we're going to give the user $100 credit. Okay, so let's go back to our function. So in order to calculate the age, so we're going to use, we have the user's date of birth. Okay, so we're going to add a step. All right, so I'm going to say the user's DOB. We're going to get this from our sanitized data. All right, and this is going to be DOB. Obviously, I am assuming that my data is perfect. You might want to add some error handling and maybe some logic to say if it doesn't exist. You might want to perhaps uh, do some validation based on if certain data points exist or not. Okay. All right. So we have that. So now let's get the user's age. So we have the user's age, and let's see. So let's say we have the user's date of birth, variable, the year of birth. So we're going to say that if we take the current date, let's have a new date, and let's add another expression. So we can chain expressions. And I'm just going to say get year. So get UTC full year. And we add a step and we say we want to subtract. So this would be 2022 or whenever this function runs. And you subtract that from the user's date of birth. We want to wrap that date of birth in a constructor, in a date constructor, new date constructor. And then we want to add another method to get the year. Okay. All right, so then we have the user's approximate age. So we take the current year, which is at this moment 2022, and we take out whenever the user was born. It could be 1980, it could be whenever 2000, and that difference will be the user's approximate age. Now there you could get more granular. You could convert to timestamps. There's ways to pinpoint the dates to like precision, but in this case we're not doing that. We're just getting the approximate age. All right, and now that we have the user's age, then we run into our workflow. We want to initialize a couple of things. So we want to initialize the policy count. It's going to be a number, and it's going to be 0. And we want to initialize the price. Add a step, set a variable, price. It's going to be a number, and it's going to be 0. All right. So let's just take a look at what we've done. We cleaned up our data with the sanitizer function. We've basically queried our insurance plans based on the user's request. We're basically looking at the plans. If there's no response, we basically said that there's no coverage. We've got the user's approximate age. We've initialized a couple of things that we're going to use in our for loop. All right, so we're going to add a step, and this step is going to be a for loop. So we're going to loop through the DB response. Copy this. All right, so add a step. So we are looping through. So less than DB response. Anyone who knows what a for loop is familiar with this syntax. So basically, this is our iterator. And we are starting from 0. We're moving up, and we are going to run this for loop as long as the current index is less than the length of our DB response. All right, so in this, we're going to say we're going to get the base rate. All right. So let's see, we get a policy object. That policy object is going to be our DB response mapped to the index. And that is our iterator. All right, so this is so we are looping through the response, and each item in the response from our database is a policy, and we're just extracting a policy object. We're gonna get the price or the base rate of that policy object. And this is going to be a number, policy object, map to base rate. Pretty straightforward. Okay. Now the next thing we're going to do is that we're going to apply our if else. So remember that we had this if else logic to say, hey, if the user is less than 18, if the user is greater than 30, if the user is older than 30, right? And if the user has all three policies. So these two are going to go in with these two are going to go in our if in our for loop. We're going to tackle this outside of our for loop. All right. So we're going to run an if else statement on function else. So we're going to say if the user's age. So remember that we have the age over here in this variable. If the user's age is less than switch to a number 18, then our price, this is the price that this is the overall price, total price. Our price to be our variable price is going to be equals to the price plus so let's see, if the user is less than 18, we want this to be a 15% markup. So we're going to multiply the base rates by 1.15. So I'm going to open parentheses, add another step. We're going to reference that base rate. Another step. We're going to multiply that base rate by the number 1.15. And we are going to close our parentheses. So that's it. It's a very simple So we're just going to keep on adding, right? Uh, the current price plus the base rate times 1.15. Now the else statement. So I'll go over here. Else if, how do we want to do this? I guess to say else if the age is greater than, that'll be the only other option, right? If the age is greater, let's say greater or equals to 18, number, we are going to have a nested if else. So we say if the age is greater than 30, then we want to have our price, a variable price, set to price, variable plus open parentheses, base rate, multiplied by, and we wanted to give the user a 10% discount, so we're going to be multiplying by zero point 0.9, close parentheses. So that's it. So we say, okay, if the user is less than 18, we basically give the user a 15% markup. If the user is greater than 18, then we check further and say, okay, if the user is greater than 30, then we give the user a 10% discount. And we say else if the user is less than 30. We'll say less than or equals to. In this case, we're just giving the user the price with no discounts. So it's going to be variable price. That's going to be price. Let's see. Plus base rate. That's it. All right, let's just do a quick, summary of what we've done so far. First of all, we sanitized our request body. This is a function that runs in an API. So we're going to have the request body parameter. It is a system generated parameter, request body, along with request headers and all the other parameters that the system provides for you. We basically ran a query on our MongoDB database. This is going to run in a remote server securely, and your credentials never surface to any environments that a user can detect. We check to see if we get any response. So, do we have any plans that match your criteria in your query? And if not, we return a message that says, "Hey, no coverage available." Then, if that's not the case, we get the user's age by just doing a rough calculation of the current year minus the user's birth year. Then we basically have some counters. So we have the policy count and price. We do a for loop on the database response. So we're starting at index 0. We're counting up until the DB response length. We get our policy object from our database response and the iterator parameter. We get the base rate from our policy object. We run our logic to say, hey, if the user's age is under 18, we want to give the user a 15% markup. If the user is greater than 18, if the user is greater than 30, older than 30, then we want to give the user a 10% discount. And if the user is 30 years or from 18 to 30, then we just want to give the user at rate. All right. And here what we can do is for, just for the sake of, easiness, we can just say, hey, the policy count is just going to be DB response length. So, all right. So here are a few things, right? You might notice there isn't a lot of validation here. When you write your functions in your APIs, in your production APIs, you add as much validation as you want. In this particular function, um, I'm not going to the depths that I would go if this was an actual production product. First of all, obviously, you might want to check to see if uh, there are policy overlaps because you don't want the user to be charged for three separate auto policies, or two auto policies and one boat policy. Uh, so you add your validations in there. That's the given. Okay. So now that we have our price, we're gonna work it through our last workflow. All right. So we're gonna do another if else statement. All right. So we're just gonna type if. We're gonna say if the policy count is greater than 3, I will say greater than or equals to 3, the number 3. Then we want to give the user $100 credit. Price is equals to the price minus number 100. Okay, there you have it. And we're going to return an object, and it's just going to have the message. It's going to say what is, going to put a space, USD. We just want to put $sign. It is what it is. We are assuming that everything here is dollars. All right, so let's see. Let's add a plus because we are actually adding strings together. So quote is plus empty string plus so quote is plus space plus dollar plus price. That's it. So the quote is whatever the price is. So there you have it. You have your function. It was a big one, but we did it without writing a single line of code. So I've deployed this. I'm going to go back to my API, go to my policy. So get quote. We're going to attach it to a function. And I am going to select the get insurance quote function. And that's it. Save. Deploy to development. So we have to go back to the endpoint, get the URL, copy that. I'm going to pull Postman back in, open a new tab, paste that in there. It's going to be a post request. Body is going to be JSON. And I think I already had the sample query over here. So ping it. All right, so my quote is 575. I have all three. Let's see if we just check Florida. Okay. So in this case, I am obviously above 30. So let's see. What if I'm under 18? What if I was born in 2000 and, I don't know, 2015? 2015? It's definitely going to be higher, 590. So we have that markup. So let's see. What if I only want to query for home? All right, so $402 for home. And what if I was 1980? What if I was older than 30? 315. All right, so we've created, an entire application with APIs. We've created plans, we've queried our plans, and we've, written our logic to get the quote. This is currently only deployed to the development environment. You can deploy this to your test production. It doesn't matter. It's just a straightforward process. You can look at the deployment video for APIs. So, what have we done? Uh, we've basically built a full app with APIs and functions. We haven't written any code. This was completely serverless. We didn't deploy any files. Um, the performance is amazing, and this, I guess, opens your eyes to see the potential. You can build whatever you want. There's no limits. There's no constraints. I hope you guys enjoyed this as much as I did. Sorry about the length, but it had to be done. And I'll see you in the next video.